something that has really annoyed me over the last several years, where people talk about, these various group rights. And my thinking is, wait, no, everybody has the same rights. Just because people are, collectivized in a group doesn't mean that they should have more rights or fewer rights. As a living, breathing human being, you have the same rights as everyone else, which means that, if you and 3 people get together and say, Darryl, you owe us 1/10 of everything you earn, I would say, screw you. But if you and your 3 friends call yourselves a government, somehow people think that gives you the right to then legitimately say, Darryl, give us 10% of everything you earn. But I say, no, you don't have any extra rights because you've collectivized yourself into a group or called yourself a government. So I can't steal your money. Me and 100 people can't get her to me.
Hello, Darryl?
Yes.
Okay, you got cut off the last few seconds. 100 people can't steal your money. Is about what you're saying?
Right. So 100 people,
Okay.
1,000 people, 1,000,000 people, it doesn't matter how many. But just because you call yourselves a government does not give you more rights than an individual. And this could be applied to anything, whether it's the ownership of a 12-round magazine, a 30-round magazine, a nuclear weapon, or anything else. If one person claims the right, then everybody should be able to claim the right. Now, on nuclear weapons, I contend that no one has the ability to use a nuclear weapon in a purely self-defense manner, because there's going to be nuclear fallout and everything else, and someone that is an innocent person will wind up getting harmed. So, do you have a right to own a nuclear weapon? Yeah, sure, but you do not have a right to use it.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, yes. So that kind of already answers my next question as far as what would be the proper role of governments under that definition, which assume that means in the terms of the definition of the states, that would be non-existence.
In my perfect world, there would be no such thing as the state. And when I say the state, I'm not talking about like the state of New Hampshire, because you can have geographic areas that are societies that exist without the coercive government. So when I say the state, I'm talking about the coercive governments that claim the legitimacy to use preemptive force in a geographic area. So there's actually a lot of history of stateless societies. Ireland, there's a lot of history of Ireland being stateless for, I've heard, anywhere between 1,000 to 2,000 years. There's a place, I believe the name is Caspia. I might be pronouncing that wrong. It's somewhere, I believe, on the Italian-Swiss border, to where for a couple hundred years, because somebody, quote unquote, goofed up when they were drawing a map and writing a treaty, that this little area of about 1.5 square miles wound up not being in any country at all, and they existed just fine. And they actually made sure that during the time that they were not part of any country, that they had no leaders, they had no rulers, they had no taxes. So it really was an anarchist society, and it existed just fine for a couple hundred years. Nobody invaded. They never invaded anybody else. And I want to make sure to be clear here, when I'm talking about, stateless society, not every libertarian believes that. There are some libertarians who, on good faith, and I believe that they are, exercising good faith when they say this. They believe that there is a limited role for government, and that limited role is protection of life, liberty, and property. So basically that would be police force, but only to police actual crimes. And again, I'm getting myself into a little bit of word trouble here, because if you look up the etymology of the word crime, it basically originally meant an offense against the king. But most people now, especially people that call themselves libertarians, think that the only things that are crimes are things that actually have a victim. So, I would consider those really to be more torts than crimes, because, again, based on the meaning of words, and I do believe that words have meaning, crime would be an offense against the state. So when I talk about, police enforcing the real crimes, I'm actually talking about enforcing the torts. So if you steal something from your neighbor, if you assault your neighbor, if you kill your neighbor, then obviously you need somebody that can, handle that, make the arrest, to get entering persecution, etc. So the people that are minarchist libertarians, minarchist meaning minimal state, and some people like to jokingly refer to them as mini-statists, but the people that believe in, a limited role of government, protection of life, liberty, property, they generally think of police or government being there to do police, courts, and that's about it. There are some who, and Thomas Jefferson was one of these minarchists that believed that government had a role in education. But most of the libertarian, the small L libertarians that believe in limited government that I know, they don't want the state involved in education at all. Now, if I could just find a way to convince them that we don't need the state-run police and the state-run courts, then, maybe they would be well on their way to being, like I am, a voluntarist in believing that we don't need these coercive governments that, operate basically on force and the threats of force to exist.
Right. Yeah, so I don't know, that's mentioned, of course, I don't know how they really hold that the job is for the protect life, liberty, and property when they only exist off of just on threatening those three basic things. But I don't know, it's really inconsistency. They have to really realize that.
Right, but again, if the police were not out arresting people for possessing drugs or, threatening to steal people's cars because they refuse to pay a parking meter, or they, God forbid, got held up 3 minutes at whatever store they were in before they could get to the meter, and, meter's expired, you now owe us money. Oh, you don't want to give us money? Okay, we take your car. So if they weren't doing that, and they, again, were only going after the people that have actually harmed someone, then I'm sure people would voluntarily pay for that. I know I would. Yeah. And you already have companies that are doing security services. Brinks and ADT, they're doing security services to where they are preemptively helping people protect their stuff. Here's an alarm. If this goes off, then we respond, and if we see anything suspicious. And the police don't do that. The police drive around looking for people. Oh, you've got an open beverage container, and that bottle has alcohol in it. You now owe us $200. Like, that would not happen in a stateless society, or even in a society where the police only protected life, liberty, and property. That would not happen.
Mm-hmm.
And I wrote an article a while back titled Funding Government Without Taxation. And I talked about ways to voluntarily fund government projects. And you often hear where, some politician will say, well, it's only 3 cents a day. If you don't want to pay for that, then you're a horrible person. Okay, well, there are things that government does that I would not mind paying for. Like, I would gladly donate money to NASA because I think space exploration is really cool. I would not donate money to the U.S. military or the NSA or the FBI or the CIA or the Department of Homeland Security or pretty much anything else that the government does because I do not value those services. But, hey, you want to shoot things into space? Okay, here's $50. Keep it up. It's really cool. And there are people that they value these other things, and they would donate for those things. And if a service cannot, this is how the, not really a free market, but the, supposedly free market that we have that's really a heavily regulated market, that's the way it works. For the most part, if you provide a good or service that people don't value, then you're not going to be in business very long unless you're very well connected to people in positions of power that can give you taxpayer money. That's how the regulated market would to provide a good or service that people want. You're not staying in business very long because you're not making money. And I don't know anybody that wants to run a business to intentionally lose money. Now, there are some people that they'll start up businesses and lose money on it just for the tax write-off. But again, in a stateless society or even a society of minimal government, I don't think you would have these weird tax loophole things to where you actually wind up benefiting by losing money. So again, you would have like a real free market or something incredibly close to a free market to where if you don't provide a good or service that people want, then you're not staying in business. And the same should go for every government program. If they're not able to raise the money through voluntary means for that program, it should not exist. And there's a very, I don't know how popular it is, but I really liked the video where I'm sure you're aware of the 10-question survey. It's called the World's Smallest Political Quiz. It's put out by the Advocates for Self-Government. There's somebody that put out a one-question World's Smallest Political Quiz. One question: should any good or service be provided at the barrel of a gun? And it doesn't matter what the good or service is, should it be provided at the barrel of a gun? And an actual libertarian would say absolutely not. Nothing should be provided at the barrel of a gun, meaning that, that there should not be any threat of force for you to either do or not do something. But the people that claim to be libertarians or people that have had the term libertarian thrust upon them who have repeatedly said, I'm not a libertarian, they believe that some goods and services do need to be provided at the barrel of a gun. And some of those people have also said that, no American should be killed by a drone without having first been charged of a crime and being convicted of a crime, and then 2 weeks later go on CNN and say, if you walk out of a liquor store with $50 and a handgun, which in New Hampshire is perfectly legal to walk into and out of a liquor store with a handgun, and maybe the $50 is my change for buying that Old Man in the Mountain vodka bottle that the governor is selling to restore some flags. So, $50 is my change. Still got my handgun because it's legal to do so, and I've got a bottle of vodka. This certain individual says, I don't care if a drone kills you or a policeman kills you. Wait, what happened to you shouldn't be killed by a drone without having been charged with and convicted of a crime? And people still want to call him a libertarian.
Yeah, that is rather weird. And see, I got non-Hebrew for me in the chat room says G4S is a big one. I think that's a private security company. Said they're used in that fashion, asset protection. in Europe. He says it becomes an issue when they're used as replacement police force.
I'm not familiar with G4S or the specifics of them being used as a replacement police force. I don't know if he's talking about some sort of government contract sort of thing. And if that's what is going on, then yes, I would definitely have an issue with that, because then it's no longer the market deciding that they are providing good service. It's, some group of bureaucrats deciding to pick a private company to then do their policing. And there are a lot of theories on how policing and courts and other sorts of things would happen in a truly free society. And one thing that a lot of libertarians, and especially people that call themselves anarchists or voluntarists, one of the traps that they often fall into is people will ask, how will X happen without the government? And they often fall into trying to explain how X will happen. And there are as many ideas on how X will happen as there are people that will explain how X will happen. What you are subconsciously doing for the person listening is they are thinking, okay, so you do need a central plan. You can't centrally plan freedom. That's the beautiful thing about freedom, is there is no central plan. As I said earlier when you asked me to define libertarianism, you have every right that you can imagine, and probably more, because I'm sure that there are things that you could never even imagine wanting to do that do not cause unjust harm to another person. You have all of those rights.